5:15, so let's go ahead and get the workshop opened up. Just for a matter of attendance, let's see. I think Jeff is not here. He said he would not be able to be here. Jason, are you around?
Yes, I'm here, Steve.
Okay, thank you. And Gail, I see you, and Janet Hutchison, I saw you.
Yes.
And Patricia, you around?
Yep, I'm here. You betcha.
Okay. And Teresa? Teresa, you on board tonight? Okay, so that's everybody. So we're missing two for the workshop. I guess best thing just to turn this one over to Scott, or Eric, whoever is going to be in charge of moving this forward.
Go ahead, Eric.
I can begin, and then I'll ask Scott to provide some updates. So for the record, Eric Klon, City Engineer. As we all know, the City of Prineville was awarded $3 million as part of House Bill 2017 for safety and pedestrian improvements. We've chosen to team with ODOT. ODOT has about $1.8 million budgeted to update the signals along 3rd Street. So 3rd Street's state highway, and we're hopeful that by the two agencies coming together, we could get more bang for our buck. So the city, we're very interested in pedestrian safety improvements, into some beautification improvements, and really it's our time to make the 3rd Street corridor look much better than it currently looks today and operate much more effectively. So at the last update meeting, there was quite a bit of conversation regarding the required Americans with Disability Acts and the curb ramps associated with those needs. And so the ADA is a very, very important segment of our community. Scott Smith, your street superintendent, has done just a fantastic job working with that local community. We have dollars identified to make improvements. Scott meets with representatives from that community. We make the improvements that they suggest. But I really hope the council tonight will understand the magnitude of that act. That's a federal act, and the impact that would happen if we chose not to follow that. Like I said, the city of Prineville has a wonderful relationship with that community, but that's something that we just need to continue to strive to do the right thing and, put our money where our mouth is. So Scott, could you kind of give an update on your relationship with George McCart and the cost increase that you've seen in ADA ramps over the last decade? I think Scott might have just dropped off. Anyways, the ADA ramps, as you'll hear from Mike Darling from ODOT, they are very, very precise. 10 years ago, we used to pay $1,000 to improve an ADA ramp. Now they're upwards of $10,000, depending upon where they lay, and they're very, very precise. So with that said, we wanted to specifically drill down onto this topic with council. We have Ben Austin from HHPR. Ben is the design engineer for this project. And then from ODOT, we have Mike Darling, the project manager, and Aaron Sturko, who will be replacing Mike in his retirement. So with that said, hopefully Scott will be able to jump back on. But Mike, would you like to take it from there?
Sorry about that, Eric. I went offline, so I'm back.
Okay, Scott, really quick. We're just about to turn it over to
Mike.
But with that said, can you just speak a little bit about your relationship with George McCart and what you've seen in ADA ramp cost increases over the last decade?
Yeah, so George is our to-go-to guy, and, you know, George sits on a couple of state disability boards. And, you know, quite frankly, in the transportation world, the American Disability Act is driving improvements, and everything is based pretty much on meeting those ADA improvements. You know, 10 years ago, we could do a ADA ramp here in town using some of our local contractors for about $350 a ramp. And now we're lucky if we can do that for $1,700 to $2,000, just because we've had to expand the footprint of that to meet the required slopes, and it becomes very difficult. You can measure, once a concrete contractor sets their forms, you can measure with a smart level and meet those slopes, but once they start floating the concrete out of no intentions, it can change the slope to where then you're exceeding those maximums of 2% cross slope and 8.3% running slope. So it's really, really difficult. I went from 6 or 7 concrete contractors that I can get bids to actually only one local contractor. So that drives the price. So, you know, everything's based upon nowadays American Disability Act.
So great, thanks for that, Scott. And so for this presentation, this will just be a educational presentation for council. Please feel free to stop us with any questions. And with that, we'll ask Mike Darling from ODOT to kind of kick us off.
Mike, I think you're muted.
Mike, I think you're muted. We can't hear you.
No, he is. Still can't hear you, Mike.
Ben, how about you? Do we got
How about
you?
now? Can you hear me now?
Yep, Mike, I can hear you now.
Oh, okay.
And
Gotta
me?
click the right button.
You good with me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Go ahead, Mike.
What about the material that I sent in earlier? Is that visible to council? Okay, great. Okay, great. So I just wanted to give kind of an overview about ADA curb ramps and why we should care, and why it's going to matter to this project. Unfortunately, I got to get into the weeds a little bit, and it's important. Please bear with us, because it does have significant impacts to decision-making process and how we spend money and what we are doing, so we're in compliance with statutes, so we're in compliance with the law. So ADA curb ramp design is going to drive many decisions about this project. March 27, 2017, ODOT settled with Disability Rights Oregon Association of Oregon Centers for Independent Living. And ODOT, at that settlement agreement, agreed to 2 things. First was inventory and remediate non-compliant ramps in Oregon, and had to do that within 15 years. The second thing is to inventory pedestrian signals and remediate those. Next slide. In addition, paving projects were going to remediate curves. What that meant was no longer could we go through and just pave. If there were ramps adjacent to that paving, we're going to be required to remediate and upgrade those ramps. Any ramps constructed all along the state highway system by ODOT projects, in other words, like our signals project that we have, any ODOT project on or adjacent to on the highway system is going to be required to upgrade the ramps, and it's going to be required to be inspected to use our ODOT curb ramp inspection form. And I'm going to show you why. Again, this is a detail thing, but this is pretty important. In addition, all work zones have to develop and implement a plan to accommodate pedestrians through and around the work zone. Next slide. So by 2032, 12 years from now, all curb ramps on the state highway system have to be in compliance. We've dropped a lot of money down to address the plaintiff's priorities. Some of those are here in Bend and Lincoln City and other place. And we're also improving outreach and communications to track variable removal requests. Next slide. The big thing about compliance is these ramps can't be almost compliant when they're constructed. There's no leeway, there's no tolerance. In fact, there's a famous quote that you see on the screen by Peter Stratton, who's with the Managing Director of Accessibility Services. A building can't be almost compliant. There's no leeway or tolerance. Anything above or below that range is not compliant. It either meets the standard or it doesn't. And what we're finding as we construct these ramps is if we have the contractor build them and they're not compliant, they tear them out and they rebuild them. If they're not compliant, they tear them out and they rebuild them. And that gets to where Scott is saying that the cost of ADA curb ramps now is skyrocketing. We used to assume $2,500 a ramp for both design, the construction, the right-of-way, and all that. Those days are gone. We're seeing a lot more cost than $2,500. Next slide. Some of the requirements. These are some of the requirements now for curb ramps that are being constructed on the state highway system. There's a lot of things here, but what's important to realize is they just can't put it in just, well, it looks okay, or I guess it's okay, it's good enough. No, it has to meet all these requirements. Next slide. There's a form that the contractor has to fill out after completing it, and they have to have measured all these measurements. There's 25 separate data points on each curb ramp that they have to record and put in this form to show that it meets compliance. And as you can see, a lot of go back a second, it's either pass or fail. There's no like, well, you're good enough. No, it's pass or fail. Next slide. More inspection issues. Ramps can fail for additional things like any vertical drop-off within proximity limits, curb exposure of less than 3 inches, inconsistent ramp run. In other words, you may have the correct ramp run, but if it's inconsistent, the grade changes, it'll fail. And the contractor will have to tear it out and rebuild it. Stormwater inlets within the pedestrian access route, it'll fail. Next slide. So like I said, each ramp that is constructed has, each ramp, 25 data points. So we've collected from 27,327 existing curb ramps, 800,000 data points to determine what's compliant and what's not. And what we found is most of them are non-compliant. We actually have a schedule that we have been working on, and at this point we've got 6% of that, the elephant in the room is those 25,899 non-compliant curb ramps. And we've completed 6 of them, 6% of it, which is 1,666 ramps. We have a schedule that we're committing to, and you can see the schedule on the screen, the outline. But basically, we have to get done by 2032 and have 100% of the ADA curb ramps remediated, upgraded on the curb ramp, on the system. Next slide. So again, that's our progress. We know we're slow at first. What we've been working on at first is developing systems and processes in place, developing how we're going to determine compliance. That's where the form has come out with. That's where the inspection has come out with. So we can, we actually have some things in place so we know how to get to where we need to go. And now we're trying to scale it up and ramp up the process. Next slide. So our funding, and this is going to tie into this project. We've set aside $37 million just in the next tip cycle for upgrading ramps. And that's in addition to projects that already must upgrade the ramps. Now, for example, we're upgrading signals at Deer, Maine, and Elm. I'm not getting any ADA money for that. It comes out of the project. So any project that is on the system doesn't get extra money coming from that. They have to find a way to build that within the project or reduce scope of the project. The priority is the ADA ramps. It's driving and will continue to drive many project decisions for many years to come. So again, we used to be about $2,500. Now we've seen doubling, even quadrupling that price. And that includes right-of-way. That's just not the construction, but the design. So you get the design, the right-of-way, how you're going to get people around, the construction, and the inspection. Next slide. So our project, you kind of look at our funding buckets. We have some Region 4 fix-it money for the signals, some Region 4 ADA ramp money, which I've gotten to improve the ramps outside the signal areas, and some additional bike ped money. And then there's the House Bill 2017 money, which Prineville was really a fortunate thing to get that money to be able to do something with it in downtown Prineville. All the ADA curb ramp and ped signal upgrades that are part of this project are coming from the Region 4 funding. It's not from House Bill 2017. So all the ADA curb ramps and the ped signals that will be upgraded, constructed, and inspected using ODOT standards. And again, it's not out of the House Bill 2017 money. It's out of the Region Fix-It money. Next slide. And that's it. So that's how we got here, and that's what's driving it is, again, our settlement with Disability Rights of Oregon and others. And we have a pretty rigorous process of inspection and construction, and then inspecting that construction again. And I'm going to ask Ben Austin with HHPR to talk a little bit about, okay, the specifics on the design for us, how is that going to impact some of the decisions as far as how do we build those curb ramps that we must build, how do we build them in and still accommodate traffic and freight movements and those kind of things. Because we wanted to circle back with answering some of the questions that city council members had last time we were meeting with you guys. So Ben, can you fire up your presentation? And does anybody have any questions yet before we go any further? Okay. Yeah.
Mike?
The only thing I would add is, once again, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but Scott and your Public Works Department has done such a wonderful job working with the ADA community. With limited dollars, we're making the improvements where they make sense. However, that's not to say, ODOT was sued by the Department of Justice, essentially, and required to make those improvements. That's happened to, the city of Bend. Big lawsuit and lots of money to make those improvements over a set time period. And that's why we take this very, very seriously as your Public Works Department.
And it's big dollars. I mean, you can do the math yourself. If there's 25,000 plus ramps, and you're now talking $5,000 more per ramp, that is that's a mountain out there. And
Janet, you had a question in there.
I did. I don't recall when you did the presentation that anybody objected to the ADA ramps. It was to that 4-foot pedestrian path that you thought you needed to shorten up the roadways. And there was concern that the trucks can't even turn and make it in their lane now. How are they going to make it when you shorten that lane of traffic up and still be able to manage those turns?
Right.
I fully agree with the ADA. I am totally in support of that, and I understand where you're coming from there. It was just the design and what the minimum was that you guys needed in the design, able to make everything work and still allow, like Teresa said, trucks that are in the 40s to 50-foot trailers that can make those turns and make them and be able to stay in their own lane of traffic.
Yeah, this is Erica. Eric, we're definitely going to go through all those truck turning movements, but essentially we wanted to provide this background on ADA because at the end of the day, ADA is driving all of those extensions that we were talking about. And so we wanted to provide this background on, ODOT's lawsuit and everything. And now we're going to turn it over to Ben to explain why those can't happen in the current location.
Hi, this is Patricia Youngman. I do have a question. Did I hear correctly? It's a $32 million project?
Our project is not, this is Scott, Patricia, our project is a little $4.5 million. The $32 million, I think, is the settlement and the cost that ODOT's expecting to bring their curb ramps up to compliance.
Yeah. Our actual construction is going to be probably about $3.5 million, the construction for our downtown project. Now, there was $37 million that we're just dedicating, that ODOT's dedicating just to the next dip cycle for ADA ramp. But our project itself is about $3.5 million or so construction.
So with that, Ben, would you like to take it away?
Yeah, absolutely. We have the slides for this section. All right, so we were definitely getting into truck turning, but just to bring some of these, the discussion of the ADA stuff home and how it's applicable to the corners along 3rd Street, I want to talk about just a couple of things. So this diagram here in the background is what ODOT uses as an example of the minimum kind of design criteria and ramp details for ADA ramps. And there's just a few that I've highlighted here in blue that I wanted to kind of point out. So, ramps need to be centered in the striped crosswalk. Both Scott, Eric, and Mike all talked about ramp slopes. That 8.33% is not actually what it's designed to, because as they mentioned, if it exceeds that, it gets ripped out at that point. And then there's a 2% landing at the top. That also, at all the signalized intersections, needs to have the push button within 10 inches of that landing. So it's a very, very tight window of where that equipment can sit. Those ramp locations need to be balanced with both being visible to right-hand turns around the corner, but also the shortest crossing. So you have to kind of balance that piece. Down on the bottom there, the 10-foot minimum distance between the ramps is to give space for the push button and the audible tones. We also need that space when designing it in order to transition the grades between the two ramps. They also need to meet the cross slope and running slope requirements. And then the radius itself of the return needs to be of a sufficient size to accommodate both of the ramps along it, but then also obviously to accommodate vehicles. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So
Ben,
this is
yeah. I just want to let the council know that contrary to what's out there now, in today's world, to meet these requirements, ADA requirements, you no longer can push or put the push button on the signal pole itself. It has to be on a remote post that accommodates wheelchair reach and that type of stuff.
Right. That 10-inch reach has effectively eliminated that option, particularly on the highways. So looking at some of these requirements, this is the left side of this image here. So this is the corner of 3rd and Main, and just kind of to orient you, the light blue dashed lines is the existing curb line as it runs around the corner, and the red curb is the proposed curb line. The black ADA ramps are on the ramps associated with that red curb line, and then kind of mint green is associated with the blue line. And what I wanted to show here is that with ADA ramps along the existing curb line the way we have it, it puts the landing up into the pedestrian zone. So I guess I should explain that as well. The purple line running on each side shows where the pedestrian walks through, and then the furnishing zone, which is where you find your street lights, bike racks, that sort of thing. So it's not really the walking space. The walking space is towards the back. The landings with that mint color, which would be a ramp off of the existing curb line, pushes you out into that pedestrian zone. And that has a couple of issues. One, that pedestrian push button has to be within 10 inches of that landing. It tends to put it in a place that's going to block that pedestrian path. There's been a lot of attempts to push that forward and still have it be a 10-inch reach, and a lot of those have been ripped out at that point. Also, you can see the back of the ramps are very close to buildings. One of the primary challenges in this area is that the buildings are built right up to the right-of-way line, so you need to match the grade between the ramp and the building, and then match that grade back to the ramp on the other side. Typically, when you design these ramps, because of those flatter slopes and staying below tolerances, the landing is actually below the surrounding sidewalk grade, so you need to transition back on both sides. Is everybody hearing me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm getting notices that my internet's shaky, so I just wanted to make sure I'm not cutting out completely. And then on the right here, I just wanted to point out that this is the ODOT Highway Design Manual. Talking about the benefits of curb extensions, they also identify it as being curb extensions also increase pedestrian visibility, help control vehicular speeds, and give a downtown look to urban areas. Also noted within that section is a curb extension design at proposed locations must meet the process and criteria outlined in the ORS for freight mobility. And so that is definitely a big part of it for us, and I know that's a big part of it for you guys. So that's kind of the ADA context of why in these locations. And then now we're going to kind of step through what truck turning looks like on the corners. Are there any questions about how that plays out?
Could we go back and could you drill down into, you have the marking shown of the existing curb, how it comes out to the point, and then the proposed curb to show that pinch point, how they're similar?
Yeah, so, thanks, Eric. That's a good point. So I think when we were there in the fall, we discussed curb extensions of a few varieties, and we were kind of matching the existing radius. So there's a very tight corner on the light blue. And one of the things that we discussed with staff, and actually it was Prineville staff that had this thought, was, why don't we look at a much flatter radius through here that kind of mimics what you got going on the northwest corner of the same intersection with the cones on the inside. And the idea was that we could still provide that ADA space away from the intersection, but the pinch point right on the corner would remain the same, or actually in this case even be slightly better than what's out there today. Is that what you're after, Eric?
Yeah, for sure. Does that make sense to everybody? Do you see where we're actually pulling that back just a little bit on the pinch point? Thank you, Ben.
Yeah. So in that place, it will definitely show up again in the next few slides as we start looking at the truck turning on this. So this is what we're calling the accommodation vehicle for this. This is a WB40. And just before we get into the left side on the truck turning, up in the top right-hand corner is a list of the truck templates that AASHTO, which is a federal organization that does roadway design standards, that they have developed as kind of the envelope of the types of vehicles to use in design. And part of the reason that they have, you can see it's a pretty good size list, but it's not that long. Part of it is there's a million variations out there, right, of truck types and configurations on the road. And there is some ability to build custom stuff, but in general, AASHTO's determined that this is the kind of breadth and length of types of vehicles that we should be designing for. And so what we've done is step through a series of AASHTO templates to show kind of the range of movement on these corners. So the accommodation vehicle is a WB40, which is a truck and trailer. And you can see it's using, so when we say accommodation, we're saying that it's using all of the approach lanes and all of the receiving lanes. So in this case, it's using the left turn lane to make the corner. You can see in the blow up there in the corner, again, this is using the same color scheme as on the last page, but the truck path is outside of both the red and the blue, the proposed and existing curbs with the vehicle path turning that corner. So that's the WB40, and if you go to the next slide. So we looked at just some other accommodation vehicles. So this is a motorhome towing a boat. another AASHTO design vehicle, and you can see it has a very similar path to the truck and trailer. It does need to use the left turn lane to make that turn, but it stays off both the existing and proposed curb. And I just want to add, if you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So this same vehicle, if it there was some discussion about, well, not everybody knows to do that, and it's very true. That's more of a professional maneuver. But if a truck and a motorhome and boat make that turn today, you can see they will clip into the left turn lane, that yellow highlighted area, as they come around. Not a lot, but you've probably experienced that where you have to shift a little bit when a large truck or RV makes a turn like that. So today there's already this similar shift, but in both scenarios, the pinch point is about the same for both the curb extension and the existing curb line there. You go to the next slide. So these are examples of some larger vehicles. So those two, I think, are what we would consider our accommodation vehicles. These ones are not accommodated. So this is a WB50. It's a little bit longer truck and trailer combination. And you can see if it uses all of the approach lanes and all of the receiving lanes, it drives over the curb and over some of the ramp space in this scenario. So, we could say that's not an acceptable route. If you go to the next slide, this is that same vehicle now, but not driving over the curb. And you can see it extends out into the left turn lane. Again, on this one, the pinch point is pretty much the same, whether you're looking at the curb extension or the existing curb lane through there. And then two more, just so that we've kind of played it through. The WB67, which is the kind of more common highway accommodation truck. You can see it's way over the ramps in the corner. If you go one more slide, that truck, if it's not going to go over the curb, it has to extend way into the oncoming left turn lane to make the corner.
And this is something we see quite regularly. I'm sure if you've been in that left-hand turn lane, maybe wanting to take a left onto Main Street and head north, you just have to start backing up to try to let those larger trucks make that corner.
Yeah, and one thing to point out with this vehicle, it's actually large enough that it looks like we're not very close to the existing or proposed curb line as it turns the corner in the little blue blow up there. And that's because the first parking space to the south there is actually what is the pinch point on that, because it's such a much larger vehicle. So I think really the point of all this is that let's go to the next slide here, and we can kind of recap a few of these, and then are happy to answer questions about it. I think we really kind of driven home that the curb extensions are necessary. They're a necessary tool to help achieve the rigid ADA standards and the adherence to them and that importance. Truck turning along 3rd Street does not accommodate all vehicles today, but the proposed curb extensions will not reduce the turning movements for trucks, and in some scenarios will even improve it a little bit right at the nose of the corner there by flattening out that radius like we discussed. And then lastly, US 26 is a reduction review route, and all modifications to curbs will have to meet freight mobility standards. So it will still be reviewed from a highway standpoint. And I understand that there's still discussion about larger vehicles on city streets and how that interplay goes. But I think we're still accommodating that. And, I'll just add as a personal anecdote, I think even when I'm driving around, it's not uncommon to have to shift or back up to help get a larger vehicle through intersections similar to this. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add or if there are questions with that.
I guess what I would say is during the last presentation, the concern arose related to the bulb outs, and I think it was kind of an amorphous conversation where do you need 3 feet? Do you need 4 feet? What do you need? What can you make? And so that's where we wanted to explain the driving feature, which is ADA and these requirements. Scott made the mention to a smart level. So that's a level that is calibrated. It reads in digital degrees. And so, and we've had this happen, Scott and I've had this happen, where instead of a 2.0% slope, you have a 2.1, and you have to pull that out. It is exact, and that's why we're having very, very few contractors bid on these, because they pull those out at their own cost. And so I think, you know, the group here has done a great job explaining the need and what we're trying to meet, and I think we'd be happy to answer any questions the council may have. Scott, do you have anything to add?
No, you know, I'm glad you brought up the smart level. It's even to the point of there's only one manufacturer of the smart level that ODOT and DOJ recognizes. So you don't just go out and buy any smart level and do that. You know, even to the point of you have to have a 6-inch long one and a 2-foot long one, and it's very, very complicated. A couple of the projects that I received funding from ODOT, the East 3rd sidewalk, and quite frankly, we thought we did the ramps correctly until ODOT come out and used the smart level, and we got to replace those. So it even happens to us, and you know, we all respect our disabled community, but yeah, it's become very, very challenging. And Ben brought up a very big point of, you know, if we're out in the middle of, you know, one of our city streets in the southeast, say Fairview or something, to put in a curb ramp is much, much easier than in this downtown situation where we have established buildings with door sill elevations already established, and there's no flexibility. We've got to we can't put a step in front of that door, because then they don't have ADA access. So, you know, to accommodate all that with existing elevations means that at times you have to move out into the street and buy yourself some real estate that way. So it's very challenging.
Okay, so this is Janet Hutchison. So what I asked the last time is, what was the minimum that you needed for the curb extensions and to be able to do the ADA ramps? And I still haven't heard that today. You still showed us the 25-foot trailer, how that could work okay, but the others, even the travel trailers or the RV with a boat, how difficult it is for them, and they aren't professional drivers like the truck drivers are, so they are going to go into the turning lanes, and that's only if you've got somebody that's willing to back up. Not everybody is, so that you can get in those turning lanes. So for me, last time it was, and I think it still is to some degree this time, is that we're setting people up for failure because they can't stay within their mode of travel, within their lanes, their designated lanes that they need to stay in.
So Janet, we're showing you the minimal. You know, we don't want these bold outs any more than you do as well, that we're balancing that fine line where we don't want to go against ADA. And so we're absolutely not going to take any more room than absolutely minimal to make those work. But in those graphics that Ben showed, that's what we're having to do to make it work. And so, you know, Scott and I, we're going to get the brunt of the frustrations over there. We don't, you know, want these as well, but we also don't want a big lawsuit with ADA. And so, I don't know, Ben, maybe we go back to some of those slides and you show, you know, we're not taking any more real estate than the absolute minimum, I guess I would say.
So I guess I would kind of like to comment in that, you know, Janet, where the majority of the problem we see today is right at the point of the curb radius at those intersections. And with these with this design, we're actually, that point is actually moving back toward the buildings. You know, I can't tell from Ben's diagrams, but, you know, there's probably a foot, 18 inches, so that's going to make it easier. But, you know, the issue that we have right currently is the vehicles that you're concerned about, I'm concerned about, are having those issues. They're having to have somebody in the turn lane back up at times. And the only way that we can fix that is by, I guess, two ways. We can purchase the Edward Jones building and purchase the museum and that, or, you know, we don't have a choice. ODOT will not build this project if they don't build the ramps to compliance. So, you know, it's a tough deal, but that's the world we live in today.
Hi, this is Counselor Youngman. I just have one question. I know in some cities they don't allow crossing at the intersection. They sometimes go and move the crossing to mid-block. That way you can have the turn lanes and you don't have the chance of hitting people when you're turning. So has that been thought in? I mean, that's another thought. Has this been applied to this intersection?
Patricia, this is Mike Darling, ODOT. I'll let Ben jump in and talk about mid-block crossings, but every intersection is a legal crosswalk. And for us to move those crosswalks back, we have to essentially close the crosswalks at the intersection. And we, as far as making a mid-block crosswalk, and Ben, you can jump on here more, we try not to do that very often because drivers are not used to people crossing in front of them. They're used to people crossing at intersections. So we haven't really looked at that, and because that would be, you know, then you get to the issue of how do we get people to cross and press a button to be able to change the lights. Then you're talking, you know, additional lights at the crosswalk to stop people. So it kind of gets into a thing of that's very challenging technically and challenging financially to do.
Yeah, and the only thing that I would add to that, and Mike, you may even have more background on this, but I think because that's a legal crossing at the corners and because of the lawsuit, we're seeing very, very few. So first of all, you have to get an exception through the state to go through and have that crosswalk officially closed. It gets a sign and everything. You know, we work on tons and tons of these, and I've seen one or two in the last 5 years that I've been involved in. It's just not very common, and typically it's for you know, particular reasons of safety on those corners. And I think Mike touched on the reasons of mid-block crossings versus the corner, and the corner being safe where you're at the signal, you know, and you have that crossing ability.
Yeah, I mentioned that because I know I've seen that over in Europe. So just thought I'd throw out the idea.
So one of the things, Patricia, when we're going through on this design at the location of Maple and 3rd Street, just Maple's the street that's next to Dairy Queen, in between Dairy Queen and the car wash. We have a marked crosswalk that goes across to the dentist office, and actually the receiving ramp on the north side of 3rd Street is in between two driveways at the dentist office. That's not ideal. That's dangerous for pedestrians, and that's part of our that's part of our job as we're doing this, to make things safer. So we have, as a team with Ben and Mike and your city staff, made a proposal to move that to the east, so it's out of the front of the dentist office, out from in between those two driveways. And to do that, we've got to run it through Region 4 traffic in Bend, and then ultimately to the state engineer in Salem. And quite frankly, we're having a hard time justifying closing that, because it take a closing of a crosswalk and reestablishing another. So, Ben and Mike kind of hit on some of that. There's precedents set in the state of Oregon of that intersections versus mid-block, and you really have to have a justification to do that.
That's a great example where it really makes sense, but it's still going to be a pretty good, mountain to climb to get there if we're successful.
Other questions from the council?
This is Gail. So it sounds like our hands are tied quite a bit. And at one time, we were going to try to utilize a truck route. Is that not in the works or an option, or what can be done?
Well, I think, obviously a truck driver with a 53-foot trailer does not want to end up at 3rd and Main. That doesn't work now. It's not going to work in the future. And so we do have the 9th Street bypass half built. We're taking a more aggressive stance in getting the design done, the Combs Flat extension all the way to Peters. So any way we can keep these trucks out of downtown Prineville will be helpful. And yes, Gail, to answer your question, we are moving those projects forward.
Thank you, Eric.
Is there anything else to cover?
We're happy to answer any questions, but it sounds like that might have been the majority of the questions.
And Mayor, the only thing I'd just like to reinforce what Eric said earlier. We as staff, we almost despise curb extensions. They're hard to sweep around to keep our town clean. They're very hard to plow snow around. You can ask Eric how many times he's hit a curb extension with the backhoe, and I've hit him with the blade. And they're not, on a maintenance standpoint and at times a user standpoint, not the best, but it's just, in today's world, our ADA is first and foremost, and we have to do whatever. Like I say, if we weren't in a tight area like we are downtown with the buildings right out to the property line and all that, we could get more inventive. It costs a little bit more money because we'd have to buy some right of way and all that, but we don't even have that option in, especially at our signalized intersections, because on almost all of them, we have buildings right there that we can't gain any ground behind sidewalks. So it's a tough situation, and we have to do what we can to not make the problem worse, but meet those requirements.
And at the end of the day, go ahead.
One question I have about those bulb outs is the sidewalk on that radius slopes down all the way around the corner, so that a truck making the corner but not quite making it, are they hitting a curb or are they driving over a slope on the radius?
Ben,
do you want to take that, basically a rolled curb versus a normal curb?
Typically, particularly in an area where you're likely to see trucks do that, it would be a standard curb in those locations, mostly to protect pedestrians, so that it's not comfortable and the vehicle feels that curb when they make the corner. You do see it in some, urban areas. We could look at it here. I'm not sure it would be the best candidate for those reasons of pedestrian safety and, potential damage to signal equipment, that sort of thing. But it is done. But I think from a pedestrian standpoint, you want to deter vehicles from doing that, and you'd be better off finding other mechanisms. Pulling stop bars back, that sort of thing, has its own problems on the side street, but you could give vehicles more space to make those turns. But it's the balancing act.
Thank you. Eric, I interrupted you. I'm sorry. Go ahead. You had some comments.
Yeah, I think I appreciate the council members that were present engaging. Like I say, when this came up in the last presentation, it was more almost like a negotiation. Can you do 2 feet? Can you do 1 feet? And at the end of the day, I'll just reiterate, Scott and I we don't like these any more than anyone else. But at the end of the day, you can show that we're actually pulling that pinch point back a little bit. And as far as conversation with the public, we're having to follow ADA rules. There's really nothing to negotiate here. The only question would be, do you want to follow ADA rules or not? There's no way ODOT's going to construct something on their property that's not ADA compliant. And we're just really trying to educate council on the fact that this is a hand we're dealt, and we're trying to make the most of it.
Thank you. Any other questions from the council? Well, thank you all for participating and sharing, and folks from ODOT sharing the information that you have. And I think that probably wraps up the meeting, unless you have something else, Eric.
I just saw Janet jump off of mute. Janet, did you have something to add?
I did. So is there a way we can put a sign up there saying trucks with trailers over 25 or 30 feet are not allowed to turn here?
We could put signs in there, but, a 53-foot a truck pulling a 53-foot trailer, they're never going to do that twice. It's the ones that get caught out there. But I think that's a wonderful, maybe we look at some additional signage to try to help the community with this issue. It's always a train wreck right now when you get into that situation and you have maybe 3 or 4 cars in the left-hand turn lane that are trying to back out of the way to give that person room. So yeah, I think that's great input. We can see what we can do to try to stop that. I think the biggest issue is trucks coming from the mills to the north, from the north, trying to make that turn. And I don't know, Scott, maybe that's something we could do, put a little more signage on the 9th Street connection. Because if they can, they definitely want to hang their ride at 9th Street, not 3rd Street.
Yes, but we don't have an alternative for them if they're going east of town. Besides turning, 7th Street, I don't think would allow big trucks to turn there and get back out on the highway going towards Mitchell and that. So 9th Street would only work if you're going towards Madras or coming back on the Madras Highway and going to Redmond. It wouldn't work going east.
Well, I know a lot of them will take 9th Street down to Harwood and then use that turn at Harwood. It's a much easier turn to head east. The truckers that know what they're doing will do that route.
But Janet, currently we have a lot of truck traffic, and that includes lowboys or 53-footers that are coming from the north. They're coming in on Lamana, and they come down and they turn east onto 7th Street, Laughlin, and go out and hit 3rd Street. And they're doing that. the intersection at Bishop Tire and Cooper Electric isn't the best, but that gets used by heavy truck traffic on an everyday basis right now. So a lot of that is the locals know that, and the out-of-towners don't. And, you know, one of the challenges that we all face, ODOT, city, counties, is, you know, a lot of these out-of-town truckers are using TomToms or GPSs or whatever, and, you know, that doesn't give you the truck route. It doesn't give you the ideal route. It gives you the fastest, easy. And, you know, once they do it, then they find an alternative route to do that.
And I think if you think about just the pure geometry, if you're coming south off of Main Street, I don't know, Ben, if you have a graphic that shows this, but it's significantly easier to hang a left than it is to hang a right. You know, just fundamentally, you have so much more room when you're going to head east where the lane is versus trying to take that very sharp right-hand turn.
Right. I don't have one in front of me, but it is also less affected by the curb extension discussion as part of the reason we don't have it. Because even though you may be able to swing a couple feet wider when you're talking about a truck that big, 2 or 3 feet of additional, you know, swing out to make the turn, it isn't the difference.
So one
it's
of
a problem
the things,
either way.
One of the things that I have recently observed, we've had a lot of construction going out on South Main with Eric's ASR project. We just got done repaving that section of road. Our contractor out there was running semi-in dumps, so those are like 48-foot long dump trailers behind a semi truck. And, you know, they were either, when they were coming into town from the airport area where their pit is, they were coming down and either making a turn at Deer Street or at Harwood Street and hitting First or Second and then out South Main, and vice versa when they were taking material back to the pit. So, you know, one of the things that we could definitely work with Mike Darling and ODOT is some 3rd Street signage prior to Deer Street, prior to Harwood, with fairgrounds, directional fairgrounds signs, because that's where a lot of that RV and Prineville Reservoir signs, because that's where we're seeing a lot of our pickups and horse trailers, our RVs and that, to where they're not coming down to Main Street, and that provides a little better access.
Yeah, good point, Scott.
I think we can do that.
Thanks, Scott. So when you were talking about taking care of those extensions, you know, when it's time when you have to do the snowplow and how you guys hit them or other maintenance, is the city responsible for 3rd Street, or is that
third
or is it a share?
3rd Street? ODOT plows 3rd Street, and we plow our city streets.
Uh-huh.
So that's a combination there. We do sweep 3rd Street once a week. That's a partnership we have with ODOT. These curb extensions, that was one of the first things I told Ben Austin, is we need to design them to where our street sweeper can, the internal corner of them isn't too tight that we can't sweep it. But, you know, the snow plowing, that's a concern for ODOT maintenance. But they also have that concern of meeting their judgment issued by DOJ. So that's that give and take. And sometimes we have to, as maintenance people, we have to learn how to take care of a different geometry than we're used to.
Thank you.
sounds like we pretty well got her covered. Any last questions? All right. Thank you, gentlemen, for bringing the information and sharing it with us. And we will close the workshop and reconvene in about 15 minutes at 6:30 for the city council meeting. So, thank you all.